What happens when a Hollywood icon walks onto a daytime talk show expecting warmth, and instead steps into a moment that will freeze a studio, split an audience, and ignite the internet within minutes? Before we dive in, subscribe to Stage View, hit like, and drop a comment right now, because stories like this don't come with warning labels, and once it starts, there's no rewind. The lights inside the View studio glowed brighter than usual that morning. Not because anything was wrong, because everything looked perfect. Too perfect. The polished desk gleamed under overhead panels. The audience murmured with anticipation, clutching coffee cups and phones, whispers rippling row by row like static before a storm. Producers moved with rehearsed efficiency, clipboards tucked under arms, headsets pressed tight, eyes flicking toward the stage in trance every few seconds. Sandra Bullock stood just beyond the curtain, one hand wrapped around a paper cup she hadn't taken a sip from in minutes. Her smile was ready, practiced, gentle, the one the world knew. But her eyes told a different story. They always did if you knew how to look. She had done hundreds of interviews. Red carpets. Award shows. Tough questions. Soft questions. Ones that danced around pain, and ones that poked straight through it. She had survived Hollywood in ways that demanded resilience, humor, and silence at the right moments. Today was supposed to be easy. A conversation about her latest project. A reflection on motherhood. Maybe a laugh about fame and time passing. That was the plan. Sunny Hostin sat at the table, posture straight, fingers interlaced, expression composed but unreadable. She'd read the briefing twice that morning. Not because she didn't understand it, but because something about it bothered her. A line here. A quote there. Public praise layered over private controversy. The kind no one ever quite agreed on. Sunny wasn't new to tension. She had built a career on asking the question people whispered, but didn't want spoken out loud. She glanced toward the audience as applause began to swell. 5 seconds, a producer mouthed. Sandra inhaled. The curtain parted. Applause erupted, loud and full, the kind reserved for someone who felt familiar, safe. Sandra stepped out, smile widening instinctively, waving, nodding, her presence instantly filling the room. The audience rose halfway out of their seats. Some clapped harder than others. Some simply stared, as if seeing an old friend after years apart. She hugged Whoopi. A quick squeeze from Joy. A polite laugh with Sarah. Then Sunny. The hug between them lingered half a second too long. Or maybe not long enough. Sandra took her seat, smoothing her jacket, crossing her ankles. The camera settled into its opening shot. Theme music faded. And we are back, Whoopi said, voice warm, effortless. Today we are joined by the incredible Sandra Bullock. Applause again. Sandra nodded, eyes shining. Thank you. It's really nice to be here. At first, everything moved exactly as planned. Light banter. A joke about early call times. Sandra's laugh, still unmistakable, still disarming, floated easily across the desk. The audience relaxed. So did she. Sunny watched quietly, listening, waiting. So this new film, Sarah said, leaning forward, it's very personal. You've said it came from a deeply emotional place. Sandra paused just long enough to choose her words. Yeah, I think at this point in my life, I'm drawn to stories that feel honest. Vulnerable. Ones that don't tie everything up neatly. A ripple of approval moved through the audience. Sunny tilted her head slightly. And do you feel, Sunny asked, voice calm but deliberate, that Hollywood allows women your age to be vulnerable without punishing them for it? The room shifted. Sandra blinked once. Not because the question was hostile, but because it wasn't casual. She smiled. I think we're making progress. Slowly. Sunny nodded, eyes steady. Progress is an interesting word. Whoopi leaned back, sensing the change in air pressure. Sandra laughed lightly. It is. Sunny continued. You've often been praised for stepping away when the industry felt toxic. But some critics say that stepping away is a privilege many women don't have. How do you reconcile that? The audience murmured. Not loud enough to interrupt. Just enough to signal interest. Sandra's smile softened. She chose patience. I don't pretend my experience represents everyone's. I've been fortunate. Sunny didn't look away. Fortunate or protected? That was the moment. It wasn't explosive. There was no raised voice. No dramatic pause for effect. Just a single word that landed heavier than anything shouted. Sandra's eyes flicked to Sunny, then back to the audience, then down at her hands. I don't think those are mutually exclusive, she said carefully. Sunny leaned forward now, elbows on the table. Some would argue that protection in Hollywood often comes at the expense of silence. And silence can be harmful. A breath moved through the audience like wind through tall grass. Joy shifted in her seat. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. Sandra straightened, the warmth in her expression tightening into something firmer. I've never believed silence equals safety. Sunny raised an eyebrow. Then why not speak sooner when it mattered most? The studio froze. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, operators glancing at producers through glass. Sandra didn't answer immediately. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room, every expectation pressing in. This wasn't the interview she'd agreed to. This wasn't the terrain she'd prepared for. But she had lived here before. When people are hurting, Sandra said slowly, there isn't always a right moment. There's just survival. Sunny's voice stayed steady. Survival for whom? A low gasp came from the audience. Sandra's jaw set. For anyone caught in the middle of systems bigger than themselves. Silence stretched. Uncomfortable. Electric. Whoopi cleared her throat. Okay, let's. Sunny lifted a hand, not dismissive, just precise. One more thing. Sandra turned fully toward her now. Gone was the red carpet ease. This was raw. Present. Human. You've been called America's sweetheart, Sunny said. But sweetness can sometimes soften accountability. Do you think that label has shielded you from questions others were forced to answer? The audience waited. Sandra exhaled. No, she said quietly. I think it's made people forget I'm allowed to be imperfect. A hush fell over the room. Sandra met Sunny's gaze, unblinking. And I think today proves that. The applause that followed was hesitant, fragmented, unsure whether it was support or relief. Sunny sat back, expression unreadable. And somewhere in the control room, a producer whispered, "This is not going the way we planned." The tension didn't break. It coiled, and it was only just beginning. The applause faded unevenly, like rain tapering off after a sudden storm. Some clapped longer than others. A few didn't clap at all. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded with thoughts no one was sure they were allowed to say out loud. Sandra felt it in her chest before she saw it on their faces. Sunny adjusted her notes, but didn't look down at them. She didn't need to. Whatever came next wasn't written on the page. It was written in the tension stretching between them, thin as glass. Whoopi leaned forward, trying to reset the rhythm. Sandra, you've always been open about choosing your battles. That's something a lot of people respect. Sandra nodded, grateful for the bridge. I try to be. But Sunny didn't step back. She stepped sideways, into deeper water. Choosing battles, Sunny repeated carefully. Or choosing distance? A few audience members audibly inhaled. One woman in the second row shook her head. Another leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes locked on the table. Sandra felt a familiar heat rise behind her eyes. Not anger. Something older. Wearier. Distance saved my life at one point, Sandra said. And my family. Sunny's expression softened, just slightly, but her voice didn't. And what about the lives that couldn't afford distance? The word afford landed hard. Joy finally spoke, half laughing, half pleading. Okay, this is getting heavy for 10 in the morning. But the moment had slipped beyond steering wheels and commercial breaks. Sandra turned fully toward Sunny now, shoulders squared. I won't apologize for surviving. A scattered clap came from the back of the audience. Then another. A small pocket of applause formed, hesitant but real. Sunny nodded once. I'm not asking for an apology. Then what are you asking for? Sandra shot back, her voice still controlled but edged now like glass under silk. Sunny held her gaze. Honesty without cushioning. The studio felt smaller. Closer. As if the walls had leaned in. Sandra laughed once, sharp and humorless. You think this is cushioned? A murmur rolled through the crowd. Sunny didn't blink. I think it's practiced. That did it. The room reacted before Sandra could stop herself from reacting internally. A collective "oh" rippled through the seats. Someone whispered, damn. A producer near the stage instinctively raised a hand, then lowered it again. Sandra's smile disappeared completely. I've spent my entire career being told to be palatable, she said, voice low. Warm. Approachable. Easy to digest. And now I'm being told that makes me complicit. Sunny's jaw tightened. I'm saying palatability can coexist with power. And power deserves scrutiny. Whoopi interjected, firmer now. Sunny, I hear what you're saying, but... No, Sandra said gently, holding up a hand toward Whoopi without looking away from Sunny. Let her finish. That surprised everyone. Sunny paused, clearly not expecting permission. When public figures benefit from systems that harm others, Sunny said, silence, even well-intentioned, can echo loudly. Sandra nodded slowly. And speaking without full understanding can do damage too. Sunny's eyes flashed. So the solution is to say nothing? No, Sandra said. The solution is to listen before accusing. The word accusing hung there, heavy. Sunny exhaled through her nose. Do you feel accused right now? Sandra didn't answer immediately. She looked out at the audience. Faces of every age. Every expression. Support. Judgment. Confusion. Curiosity. Yes, she said finally. I do. The room went still. Sunny leaned back, folding her arms, not defensively, but decisively. Then maybe we're closer to the truth than you think. A wave of whispers swept through the audience, louder this time. Phones subtly lifted. A red light blinked on one camera as a producer signaled to keep rolling. Sandra felt her pulse in her ears. You invited me here to talk about my work, she said. About storytelling. About healing. Not to put me on trial for crimes I didn't commit. Sunny's voice stayed calm. No one said crimes. Sandra's eyes hardened. Then don't interrogate me like a suspect. That line hit the audience like a dropped plate. Gasps. Audible reactions. Someone clapped sharply once. Someone else shook their head vigorously. Whoopi finally raised her voice. Okay, we're going to take a breath. But the breath never came. Sunny turned slightly toward Whoopi, then back to Sandra. This isn't an interrogation. It's a conversation the public has been having for years. Sandra leaned forward, elbows on the table now, mirroring Sunny's posture from earlier. Then have it with the people who caused the damage. Not the ones who walked away to protect their kids. For the first time, Sunny hesitated. Just a flicker. And Sandra saw it. You walked away, Sunny said carefully. Others were pushed out. Sandra's voice softened. And you think that haunts me less? The audience quieted again. Not out of shock this time, but attention. Sandra swallowed. Do you know what it's like to realize your survival story is someone else's abandonment story? Sunny's eyes searched Sandra's face, as if reassessing a map she thought she knew by heart. That's exactly why we're talking, Sunny said. No, Sandra replied. That's why this hurts. The silence stretched so long it felt intentional, like a pause written into a script neither of them had rehearsed. Joy whispered, barely audible into her mic, "Oh my God." A producer's voice crackled faintly through someone's earpiece. We're over time. No one moved. Sandra sat back slowly, hands resting flat on the table. You asked if the America's Sweetheart label shielded me. Maybe it did, but it also erased my anger, my grief, my right to be flawed in public. Sunny uncrossed her arms. Then show us. The challenge wasn't cruel. It was direct. Sandra met it head on. Fine, she said. I'm angry. I'm angry that women are expected to be both shields and swords. I'm angry that survival is judged in hindsight. And I'm angry that the same industry that consumes us turns around and demands confessionals as proof of morality. The audience erupted, this time unmistakably. Applause. Loud. Sustained. Mixed with shouts of yes. And tell it. Sunny didn't interrupt. She watched. When the applause finally died down, Sunny spoke quietly. That anger matters. Sandra nodded. Then respect it. Sunny considered her for a long moment. I do, she said. But respect doesn't mean exemption. Sandra tilted her head. And accountability doesn't mean ambush. The tension settled into something denser now. Less explosive. More dangerous. Whoopi leaned forward again, voice firm, grounding. We're going to pause this here. The director finally cut to commercial. But the damage, or the breakthrough, had already happened. As the cameras pulled back, the audience buzzed like a live wire. Some stood to stretch, still whispering. Others stared straight ahead, processing. Sandra remained seated, staring at the table, breathing slowly. Sunny took a sip of water, her hand steady, her face thoughtful. Off camera, a producer rushed toward the desk. This is blowing up, she whispered urgently. Twitter's already on fire. Sunny closed her eyes briefly. Sandra looked up. And for the first time since she'd walked onto that stage, she wasn't sure who was winning. Or if anyone was. And when the cameras came back on, nothing would ever feel neutral again. The red light above the main camera went dark, but the heat in the studio didn't fade with it. If anything, it intensified, like a room after thunder, air thick with ozone and unspoken aftermath. As soon as the music cue ended, producers flooded the floor. Hold, hold. Everyone stay seated. One of them said too loudly, voice cracking with urgency. Another producer pressed a phone to her ear, nodding rapidly. Someone else whispered, "We've got trending alerts already." Sandra hadn't moved. Her hands were still flat on the table, fingers splayed as if grounding herself to something solid. Her chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate breaths. Years of therapy, years of discipline, keeping her from saying the one thing she knew she'd regret. Sunny stood up instead. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just deliberately. She adjusted her blazer and stepped away from the table, moving toward the side of the stage where crew members hovered, pretending not to stare while staring anyway. The distance between them, physical now, felt heavier than when they'd been face to face. Whoopi leaned toward Sandra, lowering her voice. "You okay?" Sandra nodded once. "I will be." Joy shook her head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like that." Sandra let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Neither has my publicist." Behind the scenes, Sunny paused near the curtain, hands on her hips. A junior producer approached cautiously. "Sunny, are you?" "I'm fine," Sunny said, though her jaw was tight. "What's the temperature?" The producer swallowed. "High. Very high. Clips are already circulating." Sunny nodded slowly. "Good." The producer blinked. "Good. If people are uncomfortable," Sunny said, "it means they're listening." Across the stage, Sandra finally stood. Her knees felt stiff, her body catching up to the emotional sprint it had just run. A makeup assistant hovered nearby, holding powder, unsure whether to approach. "I'm okay," Sandra said gently. "Thank you." She stepped off the stage and into the narrow corridor behind it, where the walls were plastered with old show posters and framed headlines from past controversies. She'd passed this hallway before, laughing, joking, relaxed. Today it felt like a gauntlet. Her phone buzzed in her hand. One message after another. Publicist. Manager. Friend. Another friend. Someone she hadn't spoken to in years. She didn't open any of them. Instead, she leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. For a moment, the noise faded. She saw her kids' faces. Thought about why she'd left certain rooms. Certain conversations. Certain wars. She'd always believed distance was an act of love. Now she wasn't so sure the world saw it that way. Footsteps approached. She opened her eyes. Sunny stood a few feet away, arms at her sides, expression unreadable without the bright studio lights flattening it into television clarity. The hallway felt too narrow for both of them. "I didn't expect you to come back here," Sandra said quietly. Sunny nodded once. "I didn't expect to follow you." They stood there, two women stripped of microphones, applause, and framing. No audience. No music cues. Just breathing. "I wasn't trying to ambush you," Sunny said. Sandra studied her face. Intent doesn't erase impact. Sunny's lips pressed together. "I know." A beat passed. Then Sunny added, "But neither does likability." Sandra's shoulders sagged, not in defeat but exhaustion. "Do you think I don't know that?" Sunny took a step closer. Not confrontational. Careful. "I think you've lived with it so long, you don't feel the weight anymore." That stung. "I feel it every day," Sandra replied, voice low. "I feel it when people assume kindness equals compliance. When survival is reframed as cowardice." Sunny exhaled. "I wasn't calling you a coward." "No," Sandra said. "You were calling me convenient." Sunny didn't deny it. "That's the thing about public narratives," Sandra continued. "They flatten people, turn choices into symbols." Sunny tilted her head. "And silence into permission." Sandra's eyes flickered. "Do you really believe I stayed silent because it was easier?" "I believe," Sunny said carefully, "that sometimes doing nothing feels safer than doing the wrong thing." Sandra laughed quietly. "You think speaking publicly guarantees doing the right thing?" Sunny hesitated. "No." "Then why demand it as proof?" The question lingered between them, heavy but honest. From the stage, Whoopi's voice carried faintly. 2 minutes, ladies." Sunny glanced back, then returned her gaze to Sandra. "Because people are hurting, and they're tired of watching powerful women walk away untouched." Sandra's voice softened. "You think I walked away untouched?" Sunny searched her face. For the first time, doubt crept in. Before she could answer, Sandra spoke again. "I lost friendships. I lost work I loved. I lost the version of myself that believed doing the right thing would be obvious." Sunny's shoulders dropped a fraction. "I didn't know that," she admitted. Sandra nodded. "Because I didn't tell you." Silence again. Different now. Less sharp. More complicated. Maybe, Sunny said slowly. That's part of the problem. Sandra sighed. Or maybe it's part of the cost. A producer rushed down the hallway, stopping short when she realized both women were there. We're back in 30 seconds, she said, eyes darting between them. And just so you know, this is everywhere. Sunny nodded. Of course it is. Sandra straightened, rolling her shoulders back like an athlete returning to the field. So what now? Sunny met her gaze. Now we finish the conversation. Sandra studied her for a long moment. Then quietly, on air? Sunny's answer was immediate. Yes. Sandra considered that. The cameras. The audience. The certainty that anything she said would be dissected, quoted, weaponized. She nodded. Then let's do it honestly. They walked back toward the stage together, not side by side, but no longer moving in opposite directions. As they stepped into the light, the audience erupted. Not in applause, but chatter. Everyone could feel it. Something had shifted. This wasn't television anymore. It was something riskier. Whoopi glanced between them. All right, she said carefully. Let's reset. Sandra took her seat. Sunny followed. The red light blinked on. We're back, Whoopi said. And clearly, this conversation struck a nerve. Sunny leaned forward first. It did. And I think it should. Sandra nodded. So do I. The audience quieted instantly. Sunny turned to Sandra. I want to be clear. I respect your survival. But I also believe public figures carry responsibility beyond personal healing. Sandra didn't flinch. And I believe responsibility looks different depending on what you're surviving. Sunny opened her mouth to respond, then paused. She chose her words carefully this time. What would accountability look like for you? Sunny asked. If it didn't involve confession. Sandra didn't answer right away. She looked out at the audience. At the women nodding. At the ones frowning. At the ones crying without quite knowing why. It would look like refusing to let pain become performance, Sandra said. And choosing action when it's safe, not sensational. Sunny absorbed that. And what if safety never comes? Sunny asked. Sandra met her eyes. Then maybe courage looks quieter than we expect. The studio fell silent, not frozen this time, but listening. Even the producers stopped moving. Sunny nodded slowly. That, she said, is something I can sit with. Sandra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But outside the studio, screens were lighting up. Opinions forming at lightning speed. Clips looping without context. Hashtags taking sides. Inside, two women were still talking. Outside, a storm was building. And no one yet knew how loud it would get. By the time the final segment wrapped, the studio no longer felt like a television set. It felt like the aftermath of something seismic. Chairs slightly out of place, energy still vibrating in the air, people speaking in hushed tones as if volume itself might make it worse. When the cameras cut for the last time, there was no applause cue. The audience stood anyway. Some clapped. Some didn't. Some wiped tears. Others stared at their phones, thumbs already flying. A woman near the aisle whispered, I don't know whose side I'm on. Her friend replied, I don't think that's the point. Sandra remained seated for a moment after the red light went out, staring straight ahead. Her reflection stared back at her from the glossy surface of the table. Older than she remembered, stronger than she felt. She had come in expecting promotion. She was leaving with something closer to exposure. Sunny removed her microphone slowly, unclipping it with care, as if rushing would crack something fragile. Her face was calm, but her eyes gave her away. She knew what was coming. She had lived long enough in public discourse to recognize the sound of a wave before it hit. Whoopi stood between them, exhaling hard. Well, she said quietly, that just happened. No one laughed. A producer hurried over, voice low but urgent. We're already trending. Every platform. Clips are everywhere. Sunny nodded once. As expected. Sandra stood now, adjusting her jacket, grounding herself in the small, familiar movements that made her feel real. Is it bad? She asked, not theatrically, genuinely. The producer hesitated. It's divided. Sandra almost smiled. Almost. Of course it is. As the audience filtered out, the room filled with fragments of conversation. She was so brave. She was too defensive. Sunny asked what needed to be asked. That was unfair. That was overdue. There was no consensus. And that might have been the most honest outcome possible. Behind the scenes, phones buzzed relentlessly. Sandra's publicist finally reached her, voice tight but controlled. You're everywhere. Headlines are already drafting narratives. What kind? Sandra asked. All of them. Sunny stood a few feet away, scrolling through her own phone. Her mentions were exploding. Praise, fury, think pieces being written in real time. She closed the app and looked up. They're saying I ambushed you, Sunny said. Sandra shrugged. They're saying I played the victim. Sunny huffed a quiet, humorless laugh. Of course they are. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The noise around them blurred into background static. Then Sunny said, Do you regret it? Sandra considered the question carefully. Not the interview. Not the backlash. The honesty. No, she said finally. Do you? Sunny paused. Longer than Sandra had. I regret that pain is always the price of clarity. Sandra nodded. That's the truest thing said all day. Outside the studio, the internet was already choosing sides. Short clips looped endlessly, Sunny's palatability, line cut clean of context. Sandra's, I won't apologize for surviving, shared with fire emojis and furious captions. Others posted slower edits, longer moments, urging people to watch the full exchange before judging. But outrage was faster than nuance. Entertainment blogs posted headlines within the hour. Daytime TV erupts. Sandra Bullock clashes with Sunny Hostin. Viewers stunned as interview turns confrontational. Hero or hypocrite? Fans divided after shocking TV moment. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Some hailed Sunny as fearless. Others called her ruthless. Some praised Sandra's vulnerability. Others accused her of deflection. And in the middle of it all were thousands of viewers admitting, quietly, that the conversation hit closer to home than they expected. That night, Sandra sat alone in her living room, the house finally quiet. The kids were asleep. The television glowed softly, muted, replaying clips she couldn't bring herself to watch with sound. She thought about the woman in the audience who'd been crying. About the questions Sunny asked that still echoed in her chest. About the truth she hadn't known she was ready to say until she was forced to. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Sunny. I hope you're okay. Sandra stared at it for a long moment. Then she typed back. I hope the conversation keeps going. Just better. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then, me too. The next morning, the fallout intensified. Morning shows debated the moment. Opinion panels dissected body language. Social media split into camps with names and hashtags. People projected their own stories onto 2 women they'd never met, using them as mirrors for unresolved anger and unmet expectations. But something else happened too. A quieter wave. Posts from women saying, I've never heard survival spoken about like that. Others saying, I finally felt seen. Some admitting, I don't agree with either of them, but I needed to hear this. Sunny watched one clip on her phone late that night. Not the viral ones. A longer, uncut segment someone had uploaded, the raw edges intact. She noticed something she hadn't in the moment. Sandra's hands shaking slightly before she steadied them. The next day, Sunny addressed the moment on air. I asked hard questions, she said, looking directly into the camera. And I stand by asking them. But conversations like this don't end when the show does. They're meant to continue, with empathy, not just judgment. Sandra, for her part, released a brief statement. No PR polish. No carefully engineered redemption arc. Survival doesn't look the same on everyone. Neither does accountability. I'm still learning how to hold both. The response was immediate. Some applauded. Some scoffed. But many paused. Weeks later, the moment was still referenced. In classrooms. In podcasts. In essays about public discourse and womanhood and the impossible standards placed on both. The clip became a case study. Not of who won, but of what happens when comfort is disrupted on live television. And somewhere beneath the noise, something had shifted. Not resolution, but recognition. Recognition that strength and softness can clash. That silence and speech both carry consequences. That sometimes the most uncomfortable conversations are the ones that linger because they're unfinished. On the last night the clip trended, someone commented under a reposted video. This didn't give me answers. It gave me questions. And I think that's the point. And maybe it was. Because the studio hadn't frozen that day from shock alone. It froze because for a moment the performance stopped, and real people showed up instead. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Was it accountability or an ambush? Survival or silence? Drop your honest take in the comments. And if you want more explosive, emotional, behind-the-moment stories like this, subscribe to Stage View. because the real drama doesn't end when the camera's cut.